The bruise on Evelyn's jaw was still fresh when her stepfather locked the bedroom door from the outside. Through the thin walls, she heard him laughing with Harold Grimshaw, the man twice her age who'd just paid $300 for the right to marry her. In 2 days, she'd belong to him. Unless she ran. But where could a woman go in 1887 with $3 and a newspaper clipping about a rancher who wanted a wife with no expectations of affection? Anywhere was better than here. If you want to know whether Evelyn escaped and what waited for her in the Texas wilderness, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The train lurched forward at exactly 4:30 in the morning, and Evelyn Mercer pressed her forehead against the cold window glass, watching San Antonio disappear into the purple darkness. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She gripped the worn leather bag on her lap. Everything she owned fit inside it, and tried to steady her breathing. $3.47. That's all she had left after buying the ticket. The newspaper clipping was folded in her coat pocket, creased from being read too many times. She'd found it 2 weeks ago, tucked between advertisements for miracle tonics and farm equipment. Rancher seeking practical wife. Iron Ridge Ranch, Dusty Flats, Texas. Must be hardworking. No expectations of affection. Inquire by telegram. Most women would have laughed at it. Evelyn had memorized every word. She hadn't told him her stepfather was trying to sell her, hadn't mentioned the bruises or the locked door or Harold Grimshaw's wet smile when he looked at her. The telegram she'd sent to Caleb Ryder had been brief. 23, capable, no family ties, can arrive Thursday. His response came the same day. Acceptable. Bring sturdy boots. That was it. No questions about her character. No requests for a photograph, just instructions about footwear. Evelyn touched her jaw gently, wincing. The bruise was fading to yellow-green, but it still hurt. Her stepfather had hit her when she'd refused to wear the dress he'd bought for her wedding to Grimshaw. She'd locked herself in her room after that, waited until he passed out drunk, then climbed out the window with her bag and ran. She hadn't stopped running until she was on this train. First time traveling alone, miss. Evelyn startled. An older woman across the aisle was watching her with kind, curious eyes. Yes, ma'am. Visiting family in Dusty Flats? Getting married, actually. The woman's eyebrows lifted. How wonderful! Your fiancé must be beside himself with excitement. Evelyn managed a small smile. I'm sure he's practical about it. That was the truth, wasn't it? Caleb Ryder wasn't excited. He wanted help running a ranch. She wanted somewhere her stepfather couldn't find her. It was an exchange, a business arrangement, nothing more. The woman chatted pleasantly for another few minutes before dozing off, and Evelyn was left alone with her thoughts and the rhythmic clacking of the train wheels. Outside, the landscape shifted from clustered buildings to open country. Dawn broke slowly, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that she might have found beautiful if her stomach wasn't twisted into knots. What if he changed his mind when he saw her? What if he asked questions she couldn't answer? What if— Stop it, she told herself firmly. You made a choice. Now live with it. The train ride took 14 hours. By the time they pulled into Dusty Flats, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, and Evelyn's back ached from sitting. She gathered her bag, thanked the conductor, and stepped onto the platform. Dusty Flats wasn't much of a town. A single dirt road lined with weathered buildings, a general store, a saloon, and what looked like a church that had seen better days. Tumbleweeds drifted past. Somewhere a dog barked. Evelyn stood on the platform, searching the few faces nearby. An old man smoking a pipe, 2 ranch hands loading supplies onto a wagon, a woman in a faded dress sweeping her porch. No one approached her. Her heart sank. Maybe he hadn't gotten her telegram about which train she'd be on. Maybe he'd decided, You, Evelyn Mercer? She turned. The man standing a few feet away was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and sun-darkened skin that spoke of years working outdoors. He wore a dusty hat pulled low, and his face was all hard angles, sharp jaw, straight nose, eyes the color of storm clouds. He wasn't smiling. Yes, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Mr. Ryder? He nodded once. His gaze moved over her quickly, assessing. She fought the urge to check her appearance. After 14 hours on a train, she knew she looked rumpled and tired. That all you brought? He gestured to her bag. Yes. You'll need more than that for ranch work. I'll manage. Something flickered in his expression. She couldn't tell if it was approval or doubt. Wagon's this way. He didn't offer to carry her bag, didn't offer his arm, just turned and walked toward a wagon hitched to two horses at the end of the platform. Evelyn followed, her boots kicking up small clouds of dust. The wagon was simple and practical, like everything else about this arrangement. Caleb climbed up into the driver's seat and waited while she situated herself beside him. The bench was narrow, their shoulders almost touched. He clicked his tongue, and the horses started forward. They rode in silence. Evelyn snuck glances at him from the corner of her eye. His hands on the reins were calloused and scarred. His jaw was set tight, like he was chewing on words he had no intention of speaking. Everything about him radiated control and distance. "How far is the ranch?" she finally asked, unable to bear the quiet any longer. 8 miles. More silence. "Have you lived there long?" 15 years, built most of it myself. His answers were clipped, efficient. She tried again. "The telegram mentioned it's called Iron Ridge?" "Ground's full of iron ore. Ridge runs along the northern property line." He glanced at her. "You ask a lot of questions." Heat crept up her neck. "I just thought, we're not here to make conversation," he said, but his tone wasn't cruel, just matter of fact. "We're here because you need a place and I need help. That's the arrangement." Evelyn bit the inside of her cheek and looked away. The landscape around them was harsh and beautiful in equal measure. Endless stretches of dry grassland dotted with scrub brush and the occasional twisted tree. The sky was massive, bigger than anything she'd seen in San Antonio. As the sun sank lower, shadows stretched long across the earth. In the distance, she could make out the dark shapes of cattle grazing. "Those yours?" she asked, then immediately regretted speaking again. But Caleb just nodded. "About 200 head, need to be closer to 300 to make the ranch profitable, but we're working on it." "We." The word sent a strange feeling through her chest. Finally, as twilight deepened to purple, a collection of buildings appeared on the horizon. The main house was a low structure made of wood and stone, weathered but solid. Beside it stood a barn, a few outbuildings, and what looked like a bunkhouse. Fences crisscrossed the land in every direction. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "This is it," he said. Evelyn climbed down, her legs stiff from the ride. Up close, the house looked even more worn. The porch sagged slightly on one side. Several shutters hung crooked, but the windows were intact and the roof looked sound. Caleb grabbed her bag and headed for the door. "I'll show you the house. We've got about an hour of daylight left." Inside, the house was sparse. The main room served as both kitchen and living area. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. A rough-hewn table and chairs sat near the window. Everything was dusty and clearly hadn't seen a woman's touch in years, maybe ever. "Your room's here," Caleb said, pushing open a door off the main room. The bedroom was small. A narrow bed, a battered dresser, a single window. Clean, but empty of any warmth or personality. "I'm across the hall," he continued, gesturing to another door. "There's a well out back for water. Outhouse is past the barn. Kitchen's got basic supplies, but you'll need to make a list for the next town run." Evelyn set her bag on the bed. "When is the wedding?" Caleb's expression didn't change. "Tomorrow. Town clerk handles it. Simple affair. We'll leave at dawn." "Tomorrow," she repeated softly. "Problem with that?" "No, I didn't realize it would be so soon." He shrugged. "No point waiting. You came here to marry me, didn't you?" "Yes." "Then we'll get it done." He moved toward the door, then paused. "You eaten?" "Not since this morning." "I'll heat up some stew. Come out when you're ready." He left her alone. Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her hands together to stop them from trembling. Tomorrow she'd be married to a man she'd known for less than 2 hours. A man who looked at her like she was a new ranch hand he was evaluating for competence. But she'd be safe. Her stepfather would never find her out here. Harold Grimshaw would have to find another desperate girl to buy. That had to be enough. She stood, smoothed her skirt, and went to join her soon-to-be husband for supper. The stew was simple but filling, beef and potatoes and carrots that had probably been sitting in the pot since yesterday. They ate in silence at the table. Caleb kept his eyes on his bowl. Evelyn tried not to stare at him, but it was hard not to notice little things. The scar on his left hand, the way his jaw tightened when he chewed, the careful, deliberate way he moved, like a man who never wasted energy on unnecessary gestures. "You grew up in San Antonio?" he asked suddenly. She blinked, surprised he was initiating conversation. "Yes? Well, not originally. I was born in Houston, but my mother and I moved to San Antonio when I was 12. Your mother still there?" "She passed away 3 years ago." He nodded slowly. "And your father?" "I never knew him. My mother remarried when I was 15. She kept her voice neutral. "My stepfather still lives there." "He know you left." Evelyn's hand tightened on her spoon. "He knows." Caleb studied her for a long moment, those gray eyes seeing more than she wanted to reveal. But he didn't press, just returned his attention to his stew. "You know how to cook?" he asked after a while. "Yes." "Clean, sew, basic household work?" "Yes." "Can you ride?" "A little. I'm not an expert." "You'll learn. Ranch work requires it." He pushed his empty bowl aside. "I run cattle, spring through fall. That's branding, fence repair, moving the herd to different pastures. Winters for maintenance and preparing for calving season. It's hard work, long days." "I'm not afraid of hard work." His lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "We'll see." After supper, Evelyn washed the dishes while Caleb went outside to check on the horses. She found herself looking around the kitchen with a critical eye. The shelves were disorganized. The floor needed scrubbing. The windows were so dusty she could barely see through them. When Caleb came back inside, she was wiping down the table. "You don't have to do that tonight," he said. "I don't mind." He watched her for a moment, then nodded. "I'm turning in. Dawn comes early. You should rest." "Mr. Ryder?" He turned. What should I call you? After tomorrow, I mean." "Caleb's fine." "And you can call me Evelyn." "I know." He almost smiled again. Almost. "Good night, Evelyn." "Good night." She finished cleaning, then retreated to her small room. The bed was harder than she expected, and the blanket thin. Outside, coyotes yowled in the distance. The wind rattled the shutters. Evelyn stared at the ceiling, wondering what the hell she'd gotten herself into. Mbok. The town clerk's office smelled like old paper and tobacco smoke. Caleb stood beside Evelyn in front of a cluttered desk, his hat in his hands, while a balding man named Chester Morrison shuffled through documents. "Need you both to sign here," Morrison said, tapping the marriage certificate with an ink-stained finger. "And here." Evelyn signed her name in careful script. Her hand was steadier than she expected. Beside her, Caleb scrawled his signature with quick efficiency. "Any witnesses?" Morrison asked. "Don't need any," Caleb said. "Just make it legal." Morrison shrugged and added his own signature. "Well then, congratulations, I suppose. You're married." That was it. No ceremony, no vows, no music or flowers or guests. Just 3 signatures on a piece of paper in a dusty office that smelled like old cigars. "Thank you," Evelyn said quietly. Morrison handed Caleb a copy of the certificate. "That'll be $2. Caleb paid, and they left. On the wagon ride back to the ranch, the silence felt different somehow. Heavier. Evelyn was acutely aware of the plain gold band Caleb had slipped onto her finger right before they'd signed the papers. It was too big, clearly not made for her, and she had to curl her finger slightly to keep it from sliding off. "We'll get it sized when we're in town next," Caleb said, noticing. "It's fine. It's too big. I'll manage." He made a sound that might have been amusement or exasperation. Hard to tell. When they arrived at Iron Ridge, Evelyn expected something. She wasn't sure what. Maybe he'd carry her over the threshold, even as a purely symbolic gesture. Maybe he'd say something about their new status as husband and wife. Instead, Caleb unhitched the horses and headed for the barn. "I've got work to do," he called over his shoulder. "Make yourself at home." And that was her wedding day. The first week passed in a blur of work and awkward adjustment. Evelyn woke before dawn each morning and started coffee the way Caleb liked it, strong enough to strip paint. She made breakfast, she cleaned, she learned where everything was kept and began imposing some semblance of order on the chaos. The ranch house had been neglected for so long that every task revealed 3 more beneath it. She scrubbed floors and found the wood was actually a warm honey color under all the grime. She washed windows and discovered the view of the eastern pasture was actually beautiful. She organized the pantry and realized Caleb had been living on canned beans and dried beef for longer than was healthy. He noticed. She could tell by the way he'd pause in doorways, taking in the changes. But he never said anything, just nodded and went back to work. Their conversations remained brief and practical. Need anything from town? More flour, some eggs if they have them. I'll go Thursday. That was the extent of it. At night, they ate supper together, meals that Evelyn cooked and Caleb consumed with silent appreciation. Afterwards, he'd go over ranch accounts while she mended clothes or darned socks. Sometimes she'd catch him watching her, but the moment she looked up, his attention would return to his ledger. They were strangers living in the same house. Polite strangers. It should have bothered her more than it did. One evening, about 10 days after the wedding, Evelyn was putting away supplies in the ranch's storage room when she heard boots on the porch. She was reorganizing everything. It had been bothering her for days how disorganized it was, and had moved things around significantly. The door opened. Caleb stopped in the threshold. What did you do? His voice was flat. Evelyn turned a bag of flour in her hands. I reorganized. The system you had wasn't... I had a system. It wasn't efficient. It was my system, he said, and for the first time since she'd met him, there was heat in his voice. I didn't ask you to change it. Evelyn set the flour down carefully. I'm sorry, You thought you'd just rearrange everything without asking. Her own temper flared. I thought I'd try to make this place function properly. Do you know how much time you are wasting digging through piles of... It's not your place to... He stopped himself, jaw tight. Not my place? Evelyn stepped toward him. I'm your wife. This is my home now, too. Wife in name only. The words hung between them like a slap. Evelyn felt heat creep up her neck, but she kept her voice level. Yes, in name only. How could I forget? She turned back to the shelves. But I still have to live here, and I'm still going to try to make it work better, whether you like it or not. She expected him to argue, to order her to put everything back. Instead, there was just silence. When she finally glanced over her shoulder, he was gone. She finished the reorganization alone, her hands shaking slightly. It was the first real argument they'd had, the first time either of them had shown any genuine emotion. That night at supper, the silence was different. Tense. They ate quickly, and Caleb excused himself early. Evelyn cleaned up, angry and frustrated, and something else she couldn't quite name. She was walking to her room when she noticed light spilling from under the door to the storage room. She hesitated, then pushed it open. Caleb was there, kneeling beside a pile of torn curtains she'd found earlier. He had a needle and thread in his hands, the movements awkward, unpracticed, but deliberate. He was trying to sew them. He looked up when she entered. What are you doing? She asked softly. You said these needed mending. Yes, but I'm not good at it, he admitted, showing her the messy stitches. But I figured I'd try. Evelyn's throat tightened. She crossed the room and knelt beside him. Here, she said gently, taking the curtain. Like this. She showed him the proper way to make the stitches. Their fingers brushed. Caleb watched her hands intently. Why are you doing this? She asked. He was quiet for a long moment. You were right. About the storage room. It was a mess. I don't like change. I don't like feeling like I'm losing control of the only thing I've got left. The ranch? The ranch. My life. All of it. He met her eyes. People don't stay. Everyone always leaves eventually, so I keep things exactly how I want them, because at least then I know what to expect. Evelyn understood then. The walls he'd built weren't about cruelty. They were about survival. I'm not planning to leave, she said quietly. You say that now. I mean it. He studied her face, searching for deception. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him because he nodded slowly. I'm sorry I snapped at you, he said. I'm sorry I changed everything without asking. They sat there for a moment. The curtains stretched between them, something fragile and new taking shape in the space of their shared apology. Will you teach me? He asked. How to sew properly? Evelyn smiled. Yes. but only if you teach me to ride properly. The corner of his mouth lifted. Deal. They spent the next hour working on the curtains together, Caleb's stitches gradually improving under Evelyn's patient instruction. And when they finally said goodnight and went to their separate rooms, the distance between them felt just a little bit smaller. The days grew longer and hotter. Summer arrived with a vengeance, turning the landscape brown and dusty. Evelyn learned the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings, the endless chores, the way everything depended on water and luck and stubborn persistence. Caleb taught her to ride like he'd promised. Not gentle, easy rides, real ranch riding. How to move cattle, how to check fence lines, how to sit in the saddle for hours without complaint. She fell twice and got back up both times without comment. Caleb never praised her, but she caught something like respect in his eyes when she remounted without being told to. And slowly, carefully, things between them began to shift. It started with small things. Caleb fixed the hinge on her bedroom door without her asking. Evelyn started making coffee exactly the way he preferred it. He brought her wildflowers once, claiming he'd just found them while riding and thought they'd brighten the kitchen. She mended his shirts with particular care, making sure the stitches were invisible. Neither of them acknowledged what was happening. Neither of them dared name it. But something was growing in the spaces between their careful politeness. Something neither of them had planned for. One evening, Evelyn was on the porch watching the sunset when Caleb joined her. He'd been checking the southern pasture and smelled like dust and horses. "Mind company?" he asked. "Not at all." He sat in the other chair, the one that had become his by unspoken agreement. For a while they just watched the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. "It's beautiful out here," Evelyn said. "Most people find it harsh." "It is harsh, but it's honest. There's something beautiful about that." Caleb glanced at her. "You're different from what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone desperate enough to marry a stranger." He said it without judgment, just stating a fact. Someone who'd run at the first sign of real hardship. Evelyn's hands tightened on the arms of her chair. "I am desperate. And I did marry a stranger." "But you haven't run." "No." She looked at him directly. "And I won't." Something flickered across his face, an emotion she still couldn't quite read. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then seemed to think better of it. "What?" she pressed. "Nothing, it's just—" He shook his head. "Never mind." "Caleb." He stood abruptly. "I should check on the horses." "You already checked on them." "I should do it again." He was retreating. Evelyn recognized it now, the way he'd start to open up and then slam the door shut at the last second. "You don't always have to run away," she said softly. He froze with his hand on the porch railing. "I'm not running." "Yes, you are. Every time we start to have a real conversation, you find an excuse to leave." "Maybe I don't want to have real conversations." "Why not?" "Because—" He turned to face her, and for the first time she saw real frustration in his expression. "Because this isn't what we agreed to. This arrangement. It's supposed to be simple. Life isn't simple. It can be if you don't complicate it." "I'm not trying to complicate anything," Evelyn said. "I'm just trying to be your friend." "Is that so terrible?" The word seemed to catch him off guard. Friend. Such a small thing to ask for. And yet she could see it scared him more than any drought or debt ever could. "I don't need friends," he said finally. "Everyone needs friends." "Not me." "Why? Because someone hurt you once? Because someone left?" His expression shuddered completely. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Then tell me. Help me understand." "There's nothing to understand." He stepped off the porch. "I'm going to check the fences in the north pasture. Don't wait up." He was gone before she could respond, swallowed by the gathering darkness. Evelyn sat alone on the porch, frustration and sadness warring in her chest. She was trying so hard to bridge the gap between them, and he kept pulling away. Maybe he was right. Maybe this arrangement should stay simple. But her heart was starting to feel otherwise. "Bye." Peace. A week later, one of the ranch hands, a weathered cowboy named Pete, mentioned something in passing that made Evelyn's blood run cold. "Mighty decent of you to give the boss another chance," Pete said, while helping her carry water buckets. After what happened with the last one. Evelyn paused. The last one? Pete's eyes widened. Oh, maybe I shouldn't have. The last what, Pete? He shifted uncomfortably. Wife. Well, fiancé. But the boss don't like talking about it, so maybe... Tell me. Pete sighed. About 5 years back, before my time, but the other hands told me. Boss was engaged to a woman from Austin. Pretty thing, supposedly. They were planning to marry once the ranch got profitable. But then the drought hit, lost half the herd. Bank was threatening foreclosure. Things got real bad. What happened? She left. Pete said it simply. Sent a letter saying she couldn't marry a man who might lose everything. Married a banker in Austin 6 months later. Evelyn felt something twist in her chest. He's been alone since then? Yep. Wouldn't let anyone close. Worked himself near to death getting the ranch back on its feet. We all figured he'd die a bachelor. Pete smiled slightly. You showing up surprised everyone. Giving him a second chance at not being alone. After Pete left, Evelyn stood in the yard staring at the house with new understanding. Caleb wasn't cold. He was terrified. Terrified of being left again. Terrified of caring for someone who might abandon him when things got hard. And he'd been waiting for her to leave from the moment she arrived. That evening, she found him in the barn checking on a mare that was close to foaling. He looked up when she entered but didn't speak. Pete told me, she said without preamble. About your fiancé. Caleb's whole body went rigid. Pete talks too much. He was just trying to... I don't need anyone making excuses for me. Caleb turned back to the horse. It's ancient history. It doesn't feel ancient. What do you want me to say, Evelyn? That I got my heart broken? That I was stupid enough to trust someone who only wanted me when things were easy? His voice was rough. Fine. Yes, it happened. And I learned my lesson. What lesson? That people leave when things get hard. They always do. Evelyn stepped closer. I watched my mother die slowly over 2 years. I held her hand every single day, even when she didn't recognize me anymore. When she finally passed, my stepfather showed his true colors within weeks. He stole the money she'd left me, started bringing men around, men who looked at me like I was property. Her voice shook, but she kept going. I could have given up. I could have married Harold Grimshaw and had an easier life. But I didn't. I ran to the first escape I could find, which happened to be a newspaper ad from a rancher who wanted nothing to do with me emotionally. Caleb was staring at her now. I know what it's like to be hurt, she continued, and I know what it's like to be scared of trusting anyone again. But I'm here, Caleb. I'm still here, and I'm not leaving when things get hard because my whole life has been hard. This? She gestured around the barn. This is easy compared to what I left behind. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. I'm not her, Evelyn said softly. I'm not going to leave you. You don't know that. Yes, I do. How? Because I have nowhere else to go. Because this is my home now. Because... She stopped, surprised by what she'd almost said. Because what? Because I'm starting to care about you, she thought. Because somewhere between the silence and the small kindnesses and the hard work, you've become more than just the stranger I married. But she couldn't say that. Not yet. Not when he was barely allowing himself to be her friend. Because I keep my promises, she said instead, and I promise to be your wife. That means I stay. Through drought and debt and anything else that comes. Caleb looked at her for a long moment, something fierce and vulnerable in his eyes. I don't know how to do this, he admitted quietly. I don't know how to let someone in again. Then we'll figure it out together, Evelyn said. Slowly, no pressure, just don't shut me out completely. Can you do that? He nodded, once. A small gesture, but it felt monumental. Okay, he said. Okay. The mare nickered softly, breaking the moment. Caleb returned his attention to the horse, but something had shifted. Some wall had developed a crack. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The mare foaled 3 days later, just after midnight. Evelyn woke to the sound of Caleb's boots on the wooden floor and sat up in bed, disoriented. Through her window, she could see lamplight flickering in the barn. She dressed quickly and made her way across the dark yard. The night air was cool against her skin, a welcome relief from the day's heat. Inside the barn, Caleb was kneeling beside the mare, his sleeves rolled up, speaking in low, soothing tones. "Is she all right?" Evelyn asked softly. He glanced up, surprised to see her. "She's fine. Foal's coming, though. Could be a while. Can I help?" "You don't have to. I want to." He studied her for a moment, then nodded toward a bucket. "Fresh water, and there's clean rags in the tack room." They worked together in near silence, Caleb's hands steady and sure as he helped guide the foal into the world. Evelyn had never witnessed a birth before, and despite the mess and the mare's labored breathing, there was something profound about it. Something raw and honest and impossibly alive. When the foal finally slipped free, wet and gangly and perfect, Evelyn found herself blinking back tears. "It's a colt," Caleb said, his voice rough with exhaustion and something else. Something that sounded almost like wonder. The mare immediately began cleaning her baby, and the colt struggled to stand on shaky legs. After several attempts, he made it upright, wobbling but determined. "He's strong," Evelyn whispered. "Has to be. Out here, the weak ones don't make it." But Caleb's hand was gentle as he ran it along the colt's neck. "You did good, Mama," he murmured to the mare. They stayed until dawn, making sure both mother and baby were stable. By the time they walked back to the house, the sky was turning pale gray and the first birds were starting to sing. At the porch steps, Caleb paused. "Thank you," he said, "for helping." "Of course. Most women wouldn't want to be in a barn at midnight, watching a horse give birth." Evelyn smiled. "I'm not most women." "No," he said quietly, looking at her in the early light. "You're not." Something passed between them in that moment. Recognition, maybe. Or the beginning of something neither of them quite knew how to name yet. Then Caleb cleared his throat and looked away. "I'm going to clean up. You should get some rest." "So should you." "I've got fence repairs in the south pasture." "Caleb, you've been up all night." "I'll be fine." He was already moving away from her, retreating into the safety of work and distance. But this time Evelyn didn't push. She'd learned that much about him. You couldn't force Caleb Ryder to open up. You had to wait for the rare moments when he chose to. Over the following weeks, those moments came more frequently. It started with breakfast. Caleb had always eaten quickly and left for work, but now he lingered over his coffee, asking about her plans for the day. Simple questions that became conversations. Evelyn learned he'd grown up in Oklahoma, that his father had been a harsh man who believed affection made children weak, that Caleb had struck out on his own at 16 with nothing but a horse and stubborn pride. In return, she told him about her mother, the way she'd sung while cooking, her love of wildflowers, the stories she'd told about Evelyn's father, who died before Evelyn was born. She didn't talk about her stepfather much, but Caleb was perceptive enough to read between the lines. "He hurt you," Caleb said one morning. It wasn't a question. Evelyn's hand went unconsciously to her jaw, though the bruise had long since faded. "Yes. If he ever comes here, he won't. But if he does, he won't," she repeated firmly. "He's not brave enough to follow me this far. And even if he did, he'd find a married woman under the protection of her husband. The law wouldn't be on his side anymore." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Still, if I'd known what you were running from, I would have come to San Antonio myself and dealt with him." The fierce protectiveness in his voice caught her off guard. "You barely knew me. You answered my ad. That made you my responsibility." "Is that all I am? A responsibility?" The question hung in the air between them. Caleb stared into his coffee cup for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "You're not." "Then what am I?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Evelyn felt her breath catch. There was something in his eyes she'd never seen before, something vulnerable and wanting and terrified all at once. "I don't know," he admitted, "but it's not just an arrangement anymore. Hasn't been for a while." Her heart was pounding. For me either. They sat there in the kitchen, the morning light slanting through the clean windows Evelyn had washed weeks ago, and neither of them seemed to know what to say next. The air felt thick with possibility and fear in equal measure. Finally, Caleb stood. "I should get to work." "Right. Of course." But as he headed for the door, He paused and looked back at her. Evelyn? Yes? I'm glad you're here. He was gone before she could respond, but those 5 words stayed with her all day. I'm glad you're here. From Caleb Ryder, that was practically a declaration of love. The thought made her heart skip, and she had to sit down at the table, pressing her hands to her flushed cheeks. This wasn't supposed to happen. This arrangement was supposed to stay simple, practical, emotionless. But somewhere along the way, between the small kindnesses and the late-night conversations, and the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention, it had become something else entirely. And she was terrified. That afternoon, Evelyn was hanging laundry when she noticed a rider approaching from the east. She shaded her eyes against the sun, watching as the figure grew closer. It was a woman on a chestnut horse riding with easy confidence. The woman dismounted near the porch and smiled warmly. She was pretty, with auburn hair pinned up beneath a wide-brimmed hat and freckles scattered across her nose. You must be Evelyn, she said, extending her hand. I'm Sarah Bennett. My husband Tom and I run the neighboring ranch, about 5 miles northeast. Evelyn shook her hand, surprised by the friendly greeting. It's nice to meet you. I would have come sooner, but we've been dealing with a sick steer and I couldn't get away. I wanted to welcome you properly to the area. Sarah glanced around the yard approvingly. Place looks better already. Caleb's not much for upkeep. Would you like some coffee? I'd love some. They sat on the porch, and Sarah proved to be easy company. She was forthright and funny, with a directness that Evelyn appreciated. She'd been married to Tom for 6 years, had 2 young children, and clearly knew the challenges of ranch life intimately. How are you finding it? Sarah asked. Living out here, I mean. It's not easy for women used to town life. I'm adjusting. It's different from San Antonio, but not in bad ways. Sarah studied her over the rim of her cup. And Caleb? How are you finding him? Evelyn hesitated. He's complicated. That's one word for it. Sarah leaned back in her chair. I've known Caleb for 4 years since Tom and I moved out here. He's a good man, but he's been through hell. After Margaret left, I heard about that. Then you understand why he is the way he is. She really did a number on him, broke something in him that I wasn't sure could be fixed. Sarah paused. But you seem to be doing all right with him. I don't know about that. Half the time I can't tell what he's thinking. That's just Caleb. He keeps everything locked up tight, but I've noticed changes already. What do you mean? He came by our place last week to help Tom with some repairs. Mentioned you a few times. Little things, how you'd organized his disaster of a pantry, how you'd stayed up all night helping with the foaling. Tom said he's never heard Caleb talk about anyone like that before. Evelyn felt warmth creep into her cheeks. He mentioned me? More than mentioned, he seemed, I don't know, lighter, maybe? Like some of that weight he carries around had lifted a bit. Sarah smiled. You're good for him. Before Evelyn could respond, they heard the sound of hoofbeats. Caleb rode into the yard, Pete trailing behind him. He dismounted, and his eyes immediately went to Sarah, then to Evelyn, something flickering across his face. Sarah, he said with a nod. Everything all right? Tom okay? Everyone's fine, just came by to meet your wife properly. The word wife seemed to hang in the air. Caleb's expression was unreadable. Well, I should get going, Sarah said, standing. Kids will be needing their supper soon. Evelyn, you should come by sometime. I'd love the company. I'd like that. After Sarah rode off, Caleb stood by his horse, not quite looking at Evelyn. She seems nice, Evelyn offered. Sarah's good people. She and Tom both. She said you helped with repairs at their place. Fence was down. Needed fixing. She said you mentioned me. Caleb's hand tightened on the reins. Maybe I did. What did you say? Does it matter? Yes. He finally looked at her, and there was something almost defensive in his expression. I said you were managing better than I expected, that you weren't afraid of hard work, that the place looked better than it had in years. He paused. I might have said I was glad I placed that ad. Evelyn's throat felt tight. You are? Yeah, I am. He said it simply, like he was admitting something that had cost him to acknowledge. I know I'm not easy to live with, and I know this arrangement isn't what most women would want. But for what it's worth, I'm glad it's you. The words hit her square in the chest. Not a declaration of love, maybe, But from Caleb Ryder, it was close enough. "I'm glad too," she said softly. Something passed between them, a moment of understanding, of mutual recognition. Then Pete called out from the barn about a broken hinge, and the moment was gone. But it had happened, and that mattered. That evening, after supper, they sat on the porch, as had become their habit. The sky was clear and full of stars, the air finally cooling after another scorching day. Caleb had brought the ranch accounts out with him, but hadn't opened the ledger. "Letter came for you today," he said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. "Forgot to mention it earlier." Evelyn took it, recognizing the handwriting immediately. Her old friend Clara from San Antonio. "You can read it," Caleb said, standing. "I'll give you privacy." "You don't have to leave. You might want privacy for—" "Stay, please." He sat back down, looking uncertain but willing. Evelyn opened the letter carefully. Claire's handwriting was as neat and precise as always, but the words made Evelyn's stomach sink. "Dearest Evelyn, I hope this letter finds you well in your new life. I'm writing with news I thought you should hear from a friend rather than through gossip. James Whitmore was married last month to Catherine Porter. It was a large wedding, very fashionable. I know you had hoped—" Evelyn stopped reading. James Whitmore, the young attorney who'd been kind to her after her mother's death, who'd helped settle the estate and had been the only person besides Clara to show her genuine compassion during that terrible time. She'd thought, foolishly, she realized now, that maybe when she was free of her stepfather's control, when she turned 21, that James might, but it didn't matter. That life was gone. James Whitmore and his bride belonged to a world she'd left behind. She folded the letter and set it in her lap. "Bad news?" Caleb asked quietly. "A friend from home got married. Someone I knew." "Someone you cared about?" She could have lied, could have brushed it off as nothing, but something about the way Caleb was looking at her, careful, concerned, made her want to be honest. "I thought I did. After my mother died, he was kind to me. He was one of the only people who treated me like a person instead of a problem to be solved. I thought maybe—" She shook her head. "It was stupid. He was an attorney from a good family. I was nobody. Even if I'd stayed, nothing would have happened." "You're not nobody." The fierce certainty in his voice surprised her. "Caleb, I mean it. Any man who didn't see what you're worth is a damn fool." Tears pricked her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. "That's kind of you to say." "I'm not being kind. I'm being honest." He shifted in his chair, uncomfortable with emotion but pushing through it anyway. "When you showed up here, I expected someone desperate. Someone who'd do anything to escape whatever they were running from. And maybe that was part of it. But you've worked harder than anyone I've ever seen. You've made this place into something that feels like—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "Like what?" "Like a home," he said finally. "For the first time since I built it, this place feels like a home instead of just a house where I sleep." Evelyn couldn't speak. The lump in her throat was too big. "So I don't care about some attorney in San Antonio who was too stupid to see what he had in front of him," Caleb continued. "His loss is my gain." A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. Caleb reached over, tentative, uncertain, and caught it with his thumb. "Don't cry over him," he said softly. "He's not worth it." "I'm not crying over him." Her voice came out shaky. "I'm crying because nobody's ever said things like that to me before." His hand lingered on her face for just a moment before he pulled back, clearing his throat. "Well, maybe they should have." They sat in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Comfortable, companionable. The kind of silence that only exists between two people who are starting to understand each other. When Evelyn finally went to bed that night, she reread Claire's letter and realized she felt nothing about James Whitmore's marriage except a distant sort of relief. That door had closed, but maybe that was all right. Maybe there were better doors opening right here. The next few weeks brought a shift in the ranch's rhythm. Summer heat bore down relentlessly, and the work became harder, more urgent. Water levels in the creek dropped. The grass turned brittle. Caleb spent long days checking on the herd, making sure they had enough to drink and graze. Evelyn took on more responsibilities. She learned to help Pete with the horses. She started keeping the ranch accounts when Caleb was too tired to manage them. She rode out to bring him lunch when he was working far from the house. and they'd eat together in the shade of whatever tree they could find, talking about everything and nothing. One afternoon, she rode out to the north pasture where Caleb was repairing a fence. He'd taken his shirt off in the heat, and she tried very hard not to stare at the muscles in his back as he worked. "Brought you water," she called out. He turned, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You didn't have to ride all the way out here." "I wanted to." She dismounted and handed him the canteen. He drank deeply, and she found herself watching the line of his throat, the way the sun caught the stubble on his jaw. When he lowered the canteen and caught her looking, something flickered in his eyes. "What?" he asked. "Nothing. Evelyn, I was just thinking." "About?" "About how different you look now than when I first met you." "I look the same." "No, you don't. When you picked me up at the train station, you looked like you'd never smiled once in your entire life. Now you smile sometimes. When you think I'm not watching." A slow smile spread across his face, proving her point. "Maybe I've got more reasons to smile these days." Her heart did something complicated in her chest. "Do you?" He set the canteen down and took a step toward her. Then another. Close enough that she could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes, the small scar on his chin she'd noticed 100 times before. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I do." The air between them felt charged, electric. Evelyn's pulse was racing. Caleb reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm not good at this," he said. "Talking about feelings, being close to people. The woman who left, she broke something in me I thought couldn't be fixed. And now? Now I'm not so sure it's as broken as I thought." His hand lingered near her face. "Or maybe you're just good at fixing broken things." "I'm not trying to fix you, Caleb. I'm just trying to... To what?" "To be here. With you. However that looks." He exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath. "I think about you," he admitted. "More than I should. More than makes sense for an arrangement. It stopped being just an arrangement a long time ago." "I know. That's what scares me." "Why?" "Because I already lost one person I cared about. And if I let myself care about you, really care about you, and you leave, I won't leave." "You can't promise that." "Yes, I can." She reached up and placed her hand over his where it rested against her cheek. "I'm not Margaret. I'm not going to run when things get hard. I'm here because I choose to be here. Not because it's easy or comfortable or safe, but because this..." She gestured at the ranch, at him, at the life they were building. "This is where I want to be. Even though I'm difficult and closed off and terrible at showing what I feel? Even though..." Why? It was the question she'd been asking herself for weeks. Why did her heart skip when she heard his footsteps on the porch? Why did she find herself watching for him through the window when he was late coming back from the pastures? Why did his rare smiles feel like gifts? Because somewhere between the silence and the hard work and the small kindnesses, I started caring about you, she said. And I think maybe you started caring about me too. "I did," he said roughly. "I do, more than I want to, more than is smart." "Why isn't it smart?" "Because caring about people hurts. Because letting someone in means giving them the power to destroy you. Or it means giving them the power to make you happy." He laughed, a short, almost bitter sound. "I don't know if I remember how to be happy." "Then maybe it's time to learn." They stood there in the hot sun, the fence half repaired behind them, the cattle grazing in the distance. Evelyn could feel his heart beating fast beneath her palm. "I want to," he said finally. "I want to try. With you. But I need you to be patient with me. I've been doing this, being alone, trusting no one, for so long that I don't know any other way. I can be patient. And if I mess up, if I pull away or shut down or then I'll remind you that I'm still here. And I'll keep reminding you until you believe it." Something in his expression cracked open. Relief, maybe, or hope. He leaned his forehead against hers, and they stood there breathing the same air, not quite kissing, but close enough that it felt like a promise. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." From that day forward, things changed again. Not dramatically, Caleb was still reserved, still struggled with showing affection, but there were small shifts. His hand would find hers across the supper table. He'd stand close to her when they worked side by side. At night on the porch, their chairs moved gradually closer together until they sat shoulder to shoulder, watching the stars. And late one evening, when Evelyn was washing dishes and Caleb came up behind her, he hesitated for just a moment before wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. She froze, hardly daring to breathe. "This okay?" he asked quietly. "Yes." They stood like that for a long moment, just being close. Then Caleb pressed a kiss to her temple, brief and tentative but unmistakably real, before letting go and heading outside to check on the horses. Evelyn stood at the sink, her hands shaking slightly, and realized that the practical arrangement they'd started with had transformed into something she'd never expected. She was falling in love with her husband, and terrifying as that was, she wouldn't have changed it for anything. The realization that she was falling in love should have terrified Evelyn more than it did. Instead, it settled over her like something inevitable, like the way dawn always followed darkness no matter how long the night. She didn't tell Caleb, wasn't sure she could find the words even if she tried, but she thought maybe he knew anyway. He had a way of looking at her sometimes, when he thought she wasn't paying attention, that made her wonder if he was fighting the same losing battle. August arrived with temperatures that made the earth crack and the horizon shimmer with heat. The creek that fed the ranch's water supply dropped to a trickle. Caleb started rationing carefully, making sure the cattle had enough while keeping some reserves for the house. His face grew lined with worry that he tried to hide but couldn't quite manage. "How bad is it?" Evelyn asked one evening as they sat on the porch. The sunset was spectacular, all orange and purple and red, but Caleb barely glanced at it. "Bad enough. If we don't get rain in the next few weeks, I'll have to sell off some of the herd. Can't keep them all fed and watered through a drought like this." "How much would you have to sell?" "Maybe 50 head, which means we won't hit our target numbers for the year, which means—" He stopped, jaw tight. "Which means what?" "Which means I'll have to take out another loan to make it through winter, and I swore after the last time I'd never put this place in that position again." Evelyn reached over and took his hand. He didn't pull away, just laced his fingers through hers and held on like she was the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting beneath his feet. "We'll figure it out," she said. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do, because you're the most stubborn man I've ever met, and you don't know how to quit even when you probably should." That got a small smile out of him. "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" "It's the truth." "Well, the truth is that stubbornness only gets you so far. Sometimes the land wins no matter how hard you fight." "Then we'll fight harder." He turned to look at her fully, something shifting in his expression. "Why do you say we like that?" "Like what?" "Like this is your fight too. Like you've got as much invested in this place as I do." "Because I do." "Evelyn, this is my home now, Caleb. Your problems are my problems. That's what marriage means, doesn't it? Even if it started as an arrangement." He was quiet for a long moment, still holding her hand. "It hasn't felt like an arrangement for a while now." "No," she agreed softly. "It hasn't." "So what does it feel like?" The question hung between them, loaded with everything they'd been dancing around for weeks. Evelyn's heart was pounding, but she forced herself to be honest. "It feels like something real, something that matters." "To you?" "Yes. To me. What about you?" Caleb stood abruptly, dropping her hand, and walked to the edge of the porch. For a terrible moment, Evelyn thought he was going to shut down again, retreat behind those walls he'd spent years building. But instead, he turned back to face her. "It terrifies me," he said roughly. "The way I feel about you, how much you've come to matter, because I've been here before, and I know how it ends." "You don't know, shh." Margaret left when things got hard. And things are about to get hard again. Drought, debt, maybe losing part of the herd. It's all happening again, just like before, and I keep waiting for you to realize you made a mistake, that you could have done better than a struggling rancher who can barely keep his head above water. Evelyn stood and crossed to him. "I'm not Margaret. I know that up here." He tapped his temple. "But convincing the rest of me is harder." "Then let me help convince you." She placed her hand on his chest, over his heart. "I'm not going anywhere. Not because of drought or debt or hard times. I've had hard times my entire life, Caleb. This?" She gestured at the ranch around them. "This is the first place I've ever felt like I belonged. And that's because of you." His hand came up to cover hers. "I don't deserve you." "Maybe not. But you're stuck with me anyway. Something broke in his expression then, some last wall crumbling. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight enough that she could barely breathe, and she wrapped her arms around his waist and held on just as fiercely. I'm trying, he said into her hair, to let you in, to trust this, but I need you to be patient with me. I will be. And if I mess up, then we'll figure it out together. He pulled back just enough to look at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her chest ache. Then slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't their first kiss. They'd exchanged a brief, awkward kiss at their wedding, but it was the first one that mattered. The first one that came from want instead of obligation. His lips were warm and slightly chapped, and he kissed her like he was afraid she might disappear if he wasn't careful enough. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that for weeks, he admitted. Why didn't you? Didn't know if you wanted me to? I did. I do. He kissed her again, less tentative this time, and Evelyn felt something settle deep in her bones. This was right. This was where she was supposed to be. When they finally went inside that night, Caleb walked her to her bedroom door like he always did. But this time, when he said goodnight, his hand lingered on her cheek and his eyes held a question. Soon, she said softly, understanding what he wasn't asking. But not yet. I want to be sure you're ready. I'm ready. No, you're not. You're still waiting for me to leave. But when that fear is gone, when you really believe I'm staying, then we'll... She stopped, feeling heat creep into her face. Caleb smiled, a real, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. You're something else, you know that? Is that a good thing? The best thing. He kissed her once more, gentle and sweet, before heading to his own room. Evelyn closed her door and leaned against it, her heart racing. Everything was changing, shifting into something new and fragile and terrifying. She just hoped they could hold on to it when the storm came, because she could feel it coming. The air had that heavy, electric quality that spoke of weather rolling in. And Texas storms, she'd learned, were nothing to take lightly. The storm arrived 3 days later in the middle of an afternoon that had started out deceptively calm. Evelyn was in the kitchen, working on mending one of Caleb's shirts, when the sky outside suddenly darkened. She went to the window and felt her stomach drop. The clouds rolling in from the west were massive and green-gray, the kind of color that meant serious trouble. Lightning flickered inside them, and even from inside the house she could hear the rumble of thunder. Caleb came running from the barn, Pete and 2 other ranch hands behind him. "Storm's coming fast," he said, bursting through the door. "Big one. We need to get the cattle into the lower pasture before it hits." "What can I do?" "Stay here. Make sure the shutters are secured and I can help with the cattle." "Evelyn, this isn't the time to..." "I can ride now. You taught me, and you need every hand you can get." He looked like he wanted to argue, but another crack of thunder decided it for him. "Fine, but you stay close to Pete, understand? And if it gets too bad, you head straight back here." "I will." "I mean it, Evelyn. These storms can turn deadly in minutes." "I know. I'll be careful." They rode out together, all 5 of them, racing against the approaching storm. The cattle were scattered across the eastern pasture, and getting them moved would take time they didn't have. The wind was already picking up, whipping Evelyn's hair around her face and making the horses nervous. "We'll split up," Caleb shouted over the wind. "Pete, take Evelyn and work the south edge. Jim, Charlie, you're with me on the north. Drive them toward the lower pasture gate." They separated, and Evelyn followed Pete as he rode toward a group of cattle that seemed determined to go in the wrong direction. The sky was getting darker by the second, and the first drops of rain began to fall, fat and heavy, hitting like stones. "Come on!" Pete yelled at the cattle, waving his hat. "Move, you stubborn..." The rain intensified suddenly, going from scattered drops to a deluge in seconds. Evelyn could barely see through the downpour. Her clothes were soaked through almost immediately, and the ground beneath her horse's hooves was turning to mud. Lightning cracked across the sky, close enough that she felt the hair on her arms stand up. The cattle panicked, running in different directions. Pete cursed and rode after a group breaking toward the creek. Evelyn tried to follow, but her horse stumbled in the mud and she nearly lost her seat. By the time she got the animal under control, Pete was out of sight, and she was alone in the storm with thunder booming overhead and rain coming down so hard it hurt. She wiped water from her eyes and tried to get her bearings. Through the sheets of rain, she could make out a section of fence about 50 yards away, and it was down, completely collapsed under the weight of mud and wind. Cattle were heading straight for the gap. Without thinking, Evelyn rode toward the break. If those cattle got through, they'd scatter across open range and it would take days to round them all up again. The ranch couldn't afford to lose them. She dismounted and grabbed at the fallen fence posts, trying to drag them back into position. The wood was slick and heavy, the mud sucking at her boots. Rain poured into her eyes, and lightning lit up the world in brilliant flashes that left her seeing spots. "Come on," she muttered, heaving at a post. "Come on, damn you!" "Evelyn." She turned to see Caleb riding toward her through the storm, his face a mask of fury and fear. "What the hell are you doing?" he shouted, dismounting. "The fence is down. The cattle—" "I don't care about the fence. We'll lose half the herd if they get through." Another bolt of lightning struck close enough that they both flinched. The cattle were getting closer, spooked and running blind. Caleb looked at the fence, at the approaching cattle, at Evelyn standing knee-deep in mud with her hands bleeding from the rough wood. Something crossed his face. Resignation, maybe, or acceptance. "All right," he said. "But we do this together." They worked side by side, hauling posts upright and lashing them together with whatever they could find. The cattle reached them just as they got the last section in place, and Caleb had to physically push some of them back while Evelyn held the fence steady. The wind was howling now, strong enough that Evelyn had to lean into it to stay upright. Her hands were numb and her whole body was shaking from cold and exertion, but she held on. More riders appeared through the rain, Pete and the other hands, all working to turn the cattle back toward the lower pasture. Slowly, fighting every inch of the way, they managed to get the herd moving in the right direction. By the time the last steer was through the gate, Evelyn was beyond exhausted. Her legs were shaking so badly, she wasn't sure she could climb back on her horse. But she managed, somehow, and they all rode back to the barn as the storm continued to rage. In the relative shelter of the barn, everyone was soaked and breathing hard. Pete was laughing, that wild, relieved laugh of someone who'd just survived something dangerous. "Hell of a storm," he said. "Haven't seen one like that in years." Caleb wasn't laughing. He was staring at Evelyn with an expression she couldn't read. The ranch hands started tending to the horses, and Caleb grabbed Evelyn's arm and pulled her toward the house. "Inside. Now." His voice was tight, controlled. Evelyn followed, too tired to argue. Once they were in the house with the door shut behind them, Caleb turned to face her. "Don't ever do that again." "Do what?" "Put yourself in danger like that. You could have been killed. So could you." "That's different." "Why? Because you're a man and I'm a woman? Because—" He stopped, running his hands through his wet hair in frustration. "Because I can't lose you, all right? Is that what you want to hear? I can't lose you, and watching you out there in that storm, holding up that fence while lightning was striking all around you." His voice broke. "I've never been that scared in my entire life." Evelyn's anger evaporated. She took a step toward him. "Caleb, I know you're capable. I know you're strong. But that doesn't mean I want to watch you risk your life for some stupid cattle." "They're not stupid cattle. They're your livelihood, our livelihood. They're replaceable. You're not." The words hung in the air between them. Evelyn was shivering now, her wet clothes clinging to her skin, but she barely noticed. "I wasn't going to stand by and watch everything you've worked for get destroyed," she said quietly. "Not when I could help." "You don't understand. I do understand. When Margaret left, it wasn't just about the ranch struggling. It was about her leaving you to face it alone. And you've been alone ever since, carrying everything by yourself, never asking for help because you think that's what makes you strong." She moved closer. "But you're not alone anymore, and I'm not going to stand on the sidelines while you fight every battle yourself." Caleb looked at her like she'd reached inside his chest and pulled out every fear he'd been holding on to. "You could have died, but I didn't. You could have. So could you. Do you think I wasn't terrified watching you out there? Do you think it was easy for me to see you in danger?" Her voice rose. "I'm just as scared of losing you as you are of losing me." The confession seemed to shock them both. They stood there dripping on the floor, breathing hard, staring at each other. "I love you," Evelyn said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I know this was supposed to be an arrangement. I know we weren't supposed to feel anything, But I love you, Caleb Ryder, and I'm not going to apologize for it. His eyes went wide. Evelyn, and I'm not going to leave when things get hard. I'm not going to abandon you when the ranch struggles or when the storms come. I'm going to be right here, fighting beside you, whether you like it or not, because that's what you do when you love someone. You love me, he repeated, like he couldn't quite believe it. Yes. Even though I'm difficult and closed off and terrible at showing how I feel? Even though? Why? Because you're also kind and loyal, and you care so much even when you pretend you don't. Because you've given me a home when I had nowhere to go. Because somewhere between the silence and the small kindnesses and the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching, I fell completely in love with you. Caleb crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and kissed her. This kiss was different from the others, desperate and fierce and full of everything he couldn't say out loud. His hands were in her wet hair, and hers were fisted in his soaked shirt, and they were both trembling, but not from cold. When they finally broke apart, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. I love you too, he said roughly. I have for weeks, maybe longer, but I was too scared to say it. Too scared that if I admitted it out loud, you'd disappear like everyone else. I'm not going anywhere. I know. I'm starting to believe that. He pressed his forehead to hers. When I saw you out there in the storm, saw you standing in the mud holding up that fence, I realized something. You're the bravest person I've ever met. And I don't deserve you, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to. You don't have to try. You just have to let me love you. I can do that. He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. I think I can definitely do that. They stood there holding each other, both soaked to the bone, while outside the storm continued to rage. But inside the small house at Iron Ridge Ranch, everything felt warm and safe and right. Eventually, Evelyn pulled back. We should get out of these wet clothes before we catch our death. Probably a good idea. But neither of them moved. They just stood there looking at each other, both seemingly unwilling to let go of this moment. I meant what I said earlier, Evelyn told him, about wanting to be sure you were ready, about waiting until you really believed I was staying. And now? Now I think you believe it. She reached up and touched his face. Don't you? Yeah, he said softly. I do. Then I don't want to wait anymore. Something heated in his expression. Evelyn, unless you want to wait. If you need more time, I don't need more time. I've been waiting for you since the moment you stepped off that train. He took her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. But I want to do this right. Not because we're cold and wet and emotional after a storm. I want... He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. What do you want? I want to marry you. Really marry you. Not in some dusty clerk's office, but properly. With people there who matter, and words that mean something. Because what we have now, it's not the arrangement we started with. It's something real, something worth celebrating. Evelyn felt tears spring to her eyes. You want to marry me again? If you'll have me. I know I'm not much of a catch. Yes. I'm serious, Evelyn. I'm difficult and stubborn and... Yes, she said again, laughing through her tears. Yes, I'll marry you again. Properly this time. The smile that spread across his face was worth everything she'd been through to get here. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing like children, wet clothes and storm forgotten. When he set her down, she was dizzy and breathless and happier than she'd ever been in her life. I love you, she said. I love you too. He kissed her again, sweet and tender. Now let's get you into dry clothes before you freeze. They separated to their rooms, but everything felt different now. The weight that had been pressing down on both of them for weeks was gone, replaced by something light and hopeful. Evelyn changed into dry clothes and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, still shivering slightly. When she emerged, Caleb was in the kitchen making coffee. He'd changed too, and his hair was sticking up in every direction from where he'd dried it roughly with a towel. He looked younger somehow, lighter. Coffee will be ready in a minute, he said. Thank you. He crossed to her and wrapped his arms around her, blanket and all. They stood like that, just holding each other, listening to the storm outside and the coffee percolating on the stove. When should we do it? Evelyn asked. The wedding, I mean. Soon. I don't want to wait long. Me either. We'll keep it simple. Just us and a few people who matter. Sarah and Tom, Pete, maybe a few others. That sounds perfect. He pulled back to look at her. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me. I could never regret it. She touched his face gently. You're the best choice I ever made. The storm finally blew itself out around midnight. In the morning, the world looked washed clean, and the creek that had been a trickle was running full again. Caleb and the hands spent the day assessing damage. Some fences down, a few trees fallen, but nothing catastrophic. And miraculously, they hadn't lost a single head of cattle. Guess someone was looking out for us, Pete said, surveying the herd. Caleb glanced back at the house, where Evelyn was hanging laundry in the morning sun. Yeah, he said quietly. I guess someone was. That evening, they sat on the porch together, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Caleb had his arm around Evelyn's shoulders, and she was tucked against his side, both of them tired but content. You know what I realized today? Caleb said. What? That storm was the same kind we had 5 years ago. The one that started everything falling apart with Margaret. Same violence, same potential for destruction, but this time was completely different. Because we didn't lose the cattle? No, because I wasn't alone. He tightened his arm around her. Last time I faced it by myself and it nearly broke me. This time you were right there beside me, and somehow that made all the difference. Evelyn pressed a kiss to his jaw. We make a good team. We do. He was quiet for a moment. I was thinking maybe we should get married in 3 weeks. Give people time to prepare, but not so long that I have to wait forever to call you my wife for real. 3 weeks sounds perfect. You sure? Most women want more time to plan. I don't need a big fancy wedding, Caleb. I just need you. He turned to kiss her properly, and they sat there on the porch as the stars began to appear, planning their future and falling deeper in love with every passing moment. The storm had come and gone, but instead of destroying what they'd built, it had only made them stronger. The next morning, Evelyn woke to the smell of coffee and something else. Something sweet. She dressed quickly and found Caleb in the kitchen, standing over the stove with a look of intense concentration on his face. There was flour on his shirt and what appeared to be egg in his hair. What are you doing? She asked, trying not to laugh. He turned, looking slightly embarrassed. Trying to make pancakes. Thought maybe you'd like breakfast in bed, but turns out I'm terrible at this. Evelyn crossed to the stove and peered at the pan. The pancake, if it could be called that, was burned on one side and raw on the other. How did you manage to burn and undercook it at the same time? I have no idea. He scraped the disaster into the scrap bucket. I thought it would be romantic. Sarah said Tom makes her breakfast sometimes, and she loves it. Something warm bloomed in Evelyn's chest. You talked to Sarah about romance? I talked to Tom. He mentioned it. I figured I should try. Caleb gestured helplessly at the mess. But apparently, I'm as bad at cooking as I am at talking about feelings. You're getting better at talking about feelings. Still terrible at cooking, though. Evelyn took the spatula from his hand. Move over. I'll teach you. They stood side by side at the stove, Evelyn guiding his hand as he poured batter into the pan. This time the pancake came out golden and perfect. Caleb looked absurdly proud of himself. I did it? You did. With significant help from my beautiful wife. The word wife, said with such casual affection, made her heart skip. Not your wife yet. Not really. Soon, though. He slid his arm around her waist and kissed her temple. 3 weeks. Are you nervous? About marrying you? No. About half the town showing up to see if I've actually managed to convince someone to stay with me? Maybe a little. Evelyn turned in his arms. People won't think that. You don't know this town. Everyone remembers what happened with Margaret. They all watched me fall apart after she left. Some of them probably took bets on how long you'd last. Then we'll prove them wrong. We already have. He touched her face gently. You stayed through the drought, through the storm, through me being difficult and closed off. That's more than anyone expected. I didn't stay because of what people expected. I stayed because I wanted to. I know. That's what makes it real. They ate breakfast together, pancakes that Caleb had made himself, which he seemed inordinately pleased about, and discussed wedding plans. It would be simple, they decided. The small church and dusty flats, just family and close friends. Sarah had already offered to help with arrangements, and Pete had volunteered to make sure the ranch was covered so they could take a few days for themselves afterward. Where do you want to go? Caleb asked. For those few days, I mean. We could go to Austin or San Antonio or... I don't need to go anywhere. I'd be happy staying right here. But don't you want to see the city? Have a proper honeymoon? Evelyn reached across the table and took his hand. This is where I want to be, with you, on this ranch. Everything I need is here. The look he gave her was so full of love it made her breath catch. You're sure? He asked. I'm sure. Then we'll stay here, fix up the place a bit, take our time, just be together without any pressure or people watching. That sounds perfect. Over the next few days, word of the upcoming wedding spread through the area. Sarah rode over with fabric for a dress, insisting that Evelyn needed something special, even if the ceremony was simple. They spent an afternoon in the kitchen, Sarah pinning and measuring, while Evelyn stood still and tried not to think about how real this was all becoming. You're quiet, Sarah observed, her mouth full of pins. Just thinking. About? About how different my life is now. 6 months ago, I was trapped in San Antonio, thinking I'd never escape. And now I'm here, about to marry a man I actually love, and it feels too good to be true. Sarah removed the pins from her mouth. It's not too good to be true. It's just good. You both deserve this. What if something goes wrong? Like what? I don't know. What if he changes his mind? What if... Evelyn, Sarah gripped her shoulders firmly. That man is head over heels in love with you. I've known Caleb for years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. He's not going to change his mind. But Margaret was a fool who didn't know what she had. You're nothing like her, and Caleb knows that. He trusts you in a way he never trusted her, even when they were engaged. How do you know that? Because he let you help during the storm. Because he's actually talking about his feelings instead of bottling everything up. Because yesterday Tom saw him in town buying you a present, and Caleb was smiling. Sarah raised her eyebrows. Caleb Ryder, smiling, in public. That man has changed because of you. He bought me a present? Tom didn't say what it was, just that Caleb looked happier than he's seen him in years. Sarah went back to pinning the dress. So stop worrying about what might go wrong and start enjoying what's going right. That evening, Evelyn found Caleb in the barn, working on something in the corner. When he heard her approach, he quickly covered whatever it was with a tarp. What are you hiding? She asked, amused. Nothing. Caleb. It's a surprise. For the wedding. Can I see? No. That defeats the purpose of a surprise. He crossed to her and pulled her into his arms. You'll see it when it's finished. When will that be? Wedding day. She tried to peek around him, but he blocked her view. Is it big? Medium-sized. Is it... Stop asking questions. You're terrible at waiting for surprises, aren't you? I've never really gotten many surprises before. Good ones, anyway. Something shifted in his expression. Well, you're going to get a lot of them from now on. Fair warning. I think I can handle that. He kissed her slowly, thoroughly, until she forgot all about whatever he was hiding under that tarp. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. 2.5 weeks, he murmured. Is that how long until the wedding? That's how long I have to wait before I can call you mine in every way that matters. Heat crept into her cheeks. I'm already yours. I know, but I want to do this right. Make it special. Make you feel... He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. Feel what? Cherished, wanted, loved. Everything you should have felt from the beginning but didn't because I was too scared to admit what you meant to me. Evelyn's throat tightened. You don't have to make up for anything. Yes, I do. I wasted months we could have had together because I was afraid of getting hurt again. I'm not wasting any more time. The next week passed in a blur of preparations. The dress Sarah was making took shape, simple but beautiful, cream-colored with delicate buttons down the back. Pete and the other hands cleaned up the house and yard until everything looked its best. Tom came by to help Caleb fix the porch steps that had been sagging for years. And Caleb continued working on his mysterious project in the barn, refusing to let Evelyn anywhere near it. You're being ridiculous, she told him one evening. I'm going to see it eventually. Yes, on our wedding day, Not before. What if I accidentally walk into the barn and see it? Then I'll cover your eyes and escort you back out. You're impossible. You love me anyway. Unfortunately. He grinned and pulled her onto his lap where they sat on the porch. Unfortunately. Desperately. Hopelessly. Inconveniently. Good. Because I love you the same way. A rider appeared on the horizon, coming fast. Caleb tensed slightly, his hand moving to Evelyn's waist protectively. As the rider got closer, Evelyn recognized the Dusty Flats sheriff, a weathered man named Bill Cooper. "Caleb," Cooper called out, dismounting. "Got a minute?" "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong exactly. Just wanted to give you a heads up." Cooper removed his hat and nodded to Evelyn. "Ma'am, this concerns you too, I reckon." Evelyn's stomach tightened with unease. "What is it?" "Man came through town yesterday. City fellow, dressed fancy, was asking questions about you, about a woman matching your description who might have come through a few months back." All the blood drained from Evelyn's face. Harold Grimshaw. It had to be. Or worse, her stepfather himself. Caleb's arm tightened around her. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. Told him I didn't know anyone by that description, but he seemed determined. Left heading east, but I got the feeling he might circle back." Cooper looked at Evelyn with concern. "You in some kind of trouble, ma'am?" "My stepfather," Evelyn managed. "He tried to force me into a marriage. I ran. And this man looking for you? Could be the man he wanted me to marry. Or it could be my stepfather himself." Cooper's expression hardened. "You married to Caleb here?" "Yes. Legally married since June." "Then legally, you're under his protection. Your stepfather's got no claim on you anymore." Cooper settled his hat back on his head. "If this fellow comes back, you let me know. I don't take kindly to men who chase women across the state trying to force them into things they don't want." After Cooper left, Evelyn couldn't stop shaking. Caleb carried her inside and sat her down at the kitchen table, kneeling in front of her and taking her hands. "Hey," he said softly. "Look at me." She met his eyes, and the steadiness there helped ground her. "He can't take you," Caleb said firmly. "You're my wife. You're protected by law. And even if the law didn't protect you, I would. Do you understand? I would never let anyone take you away from here. What if he causes trouble? What if he—" "Then we'll deal with it, together." He squeezed her hands. "You didn't survive everything you went through just to be dragged back to a life you don't want. I won't allow it. You can't fight everyone, Caleb. Watch me." Despite her fear, she almost smiled. My fierce protector. "Damn right." He stood and pulled her into his arms. "No one is going to hurt you. Not while I'm breathing." They spent the rest of the evening in tense vigilance, Caleb checking the windows every few minutes. But no one came. Eventually, exhaustion won out and they prepared for bed. At her door, Caleb hesitated. "I could sleep in the chair," he offered. "In your room. Just to be close in case—" "Caleb, it's fine. If anyone comes, you'll hear them." "I know, but unless you want to stay for a different reason?" He went still. "Evelyn, we're getting married in less than 2 weeks, and I trust you. If you want to stay, you can stay." "I want to," he admitted, "but I don't want you to think I'm taking advantage of the situation. You're scared and I—" She stood on her toes and kissed him. "I'm asking you to stay because I want you here, not because I'm scared, because I love you, and I don't want to be alone tonight." Something fierce and tender crossed his face. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." He kissed her then, deep and slow, walking her backward into the room and kicking the door shut behind them. And for the first time since they'd met, there were no walls between them, no fear or hesitation or doubt, just two people who'd found each other against all odds, finally letting themselves have what they'd both wanted for so long. Afterward, lying in the narrow bed with Caleb's arms around her and his heartbeat steady beneath her ear, Evelyn felt safer than she'd ever felt in her life. Whatever came next, whether her stepfather showed up or not, she knew they'd face it together. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too." Caleb's voice was rough with emotion. "More than I thought I could love anyone." "No regrets? About this? About you?" "Never." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "Best decision I ever made was placing that ad. Second best was not running you off when you showed up asking too many questions. She laughed softly. I didn't ask that many questions. You asked about everything. Where I grew up, what I liked, why the ranch was called Iron Ridge. Drove me crazy. You liked it. I did. I just didn't want to admit it. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other. And for the first time in months, Caleb slept without nightmares and Evelyn slept without fear. The man never came back. Days passed with no sign of anyone looking for her, and gradually Evelyn's tension eased. Sheriff Cooper sent word that he'd made inquiries. The man had been Harold Grimshaw, and he'd apparently given up the search after Cooper told him firmly that the woman he was looking for didn't exist in these parts. Think he believed Cooper? Evelyn asked Caleb one evening. Don't know. Don't care. If he's smart, he'll stay away. If he's not, Caleb shrugged, then he'll find out what happens when someone threatens my wife. The wedding was now just 5 days away. The dress was finished, hanging in Evelyn's room. The church had been reserved. Sarah had organized food for a small gathering afterward. Everything was falling into place. Caleb was still working on his secret project, spending hours in the barn each evening. Evelyn had stopped trying to peek and instead spent her time preparing the house. She wanted everything perfect for when they returned from their few days alone together. 3 days before the wedding, Caleb came to find her in the kitchen where she was baking bread. Come with me, he said. I want to show you something. Show me what? Just come. He led her outside toward the eastern pasture. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. When they reached the fence line, Caleb pointed. There, he said. Evelyn looked and saw a small wooden structure she'd never noticed before. It was tucked under a large oak tree, about 50 yards from the main house. As they got closer, she realized it was a bench, beautifully carved with intricate designs along the back and arms. You made this? She asked, running her hands over the smooth wood. Been working on it for weeks. Since before the storm, actually. I wanted to give you something for the wedding, something permanent. He sat down and patted the space beside him. This spot has the best view of the sunrise on the whole ranch. I thought maybe we could sit here together sometimes, watch the morning come. Evelyn sat beside him, tears prickling her eyes. The bench was perfect, clearly made with care and attention to detail. The wood was warm under her hands, and sitting there with Caleb beside her, she could see exactly what he meant about the view. Even in the fading light, the eastern horizon was beautiful. I carved our initials underneath, he said, suddenly seeming shy. And the date we're getting married. Figured it would be nice to have something that marked this, that showed it was real. It's beautiful, Caleb. The most beautiful thing anyone's ever made for me. Yeah? Yeah. He pulled her close, and they sat there watching the last of the daylight fade. Tomorrow, Sarah would come for a final fitting. The day after that, Tom and Pete would help set up the church. And the day after that... You nervous? Caleb asked. About the wedding? No. About everything after? Evelyn turned to look at him. What's there to be nervous about? We already know we love each other. We already know we work well together. The wedding is just making it official in front of people who matter. I know, but still, it's a big step. We've already taken the big steps. This is just... She searched for the right word. This is just the celebration. I like that. He kissed her softly. The celebration of us. They sat on the bench until full dark, talking about everything and nothing. About their plans for the ranch. About whether they wanted children someday. About small, silly things that made them laugh. When they finally walked back to the house, hand in hand, Evelyn felt completely at peace. In 3 days, she'd marry Caleb Ryder in front of everyone who mattered. She'd wear the dress Sarah made and speak vows that came from her heart instead of obligation. And then she'd spend the rest of her life with a man who carved her benches and learned to make pancakes and loved her with a fierce devotion that still took her breath away. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright. Evelyn woke early in her room. Caleb had insisted on staying in his own room the night before, claiming it was tradition and he wanted to do at least one thing properly, and lay there for a moment, letting it all sink in. Today she became Caleb's wife in truth. There was a soft knock on her door. Come in, she called. Sarah entered, carrying the dress carefully. Good morning, bride. Ready to get married? More ready than I've ever been for anything. They spent the next hour getting Evelyn ready. Sarah helped her into the dress, buttoning each tiny button with care. She arranged Evelyn's hair and pinned in the small wildflowers they'd picked yesterday. When she was finished, she stepped back with tears in her eyes. "Oh, Evelyn, you look beautiful." Evelyn looked at herself in the small mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked happy. That was the difference. Not the dress or the hair or the flowers, just the sheer joy radiating from her face. There was another knock. Tom's voice came through the door. "Ladies, Caleb's at the church and he's about to wear a hole in the floor with his pacing. We should probably get going before he convinces himself you've changed your mind." Sarah laughed. "We're coming." The ride to town seemed to take forever and no time at all. The small church was full when they arrived. Ranch hands, neighbors, townspeople who'd known Caleb for years. Everyone turned to look as Evelyn entered, and she heard the whispers of approval. But she barely noticed any of it, because at the front of the church, standing beside the minister, was Caleb. He'd cleaned up well. New shirt, hair combed, face freshly shaved. But what struck her most was his expression. He looked nervous and awed, and so full of love that her eyes immediately filled with tears. Tom offered his arm to walk her down the aisle since she had no family there. She took it gratefully, and together they made their way forward. When they reached the front, Tom placed her hand in Caleb's and stepped back. "Hi," Caleb whispered. "Hi yourself." "You look—" His voice cracked. "You look beautiful." "So do you." The minister cleared his throat and began the ceremony. Evelyn heard the words as if from a distance, too focused on Caleb's face to pay much attention. But when it came time for vows, she spoke clearly and firmly. "I promise to stand beside you through drought and storm, to be your partner and your friend, to love you not just when it's easy, but especially when it's hard. I choose you, Caleb Ryder, today and every day for the rest of my life." Caleb's hands were shaking as he held hers. When he spoke, his voice was rough but steady. "I promise to let you in, even when it scares me, to trust you with my heart, even though I know it can break, to build a life with you that's more than just surviving, one that's worth living. I choose you, Evelyn Mercer, today and every day for the rest of my life." The minister smiled. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Caleb pulled her close and kissed her thoroughly, not caring that half the town was watching. When they finally broke apart, the church erupted in applause and cheers. They were married, really, truly married. The celebration afterward was simple and perfect. Food and music and people genuinely happy for them. Pete made a toast that made everyone laugh. Sarah cried happy tears. Tom slapped Caleb on the back and told him he'd done well for himself. Through it all, Caleb kept Evelyn close, his hand always finding hers, his eyes tracking her whenever she moved, and she did the same, still half afraid this was all a dream she'd wake up from. But it wasn't a dream, it was real and solid and hers. As the sun began to set and people started heading home, Caleb pulled Evelyn aside. "Ready to go?" he asked. "Where?" "Home. Our home." They rode back to Iron Ridge Ranch in the wagon, both quiet but content. When they pulled up to the house, Caleb helped her down and then, without warning, swept her up into his arms. "What are you doing?" "Carrying my wife over the threshold, properly this time." He carried her inside and set her down gently in the main room. Everything looked just as they'd left it, but somehow it felt different, more like theirs. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ryder," Caleb said softly. "I like the sound of that." "So do I." He cupped her face in his hands. "I know I'm not perfect. I know I'm still going to mess up sometimes, still going to struggle with letting you all the way in, but I promise I'll keep trying, every single day. That's all I ask." She stood on her toes to kiss him. "We'll figure it out together." And they did. The first weeks after the wedding settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and entirely new. They still woke before dawn, still worked the ranch from sunup to sundown, still sat on the porch in the evenings watching the stars appear. But now there were no separate bedrooms, no careful distance maintained, no walls between them. Caleb reached for her in the night, and she was there. She called his name, and he answered, simple things that meant everything. September brought cooler temperatures and the first real relief from the summer heat. The cattle were healthy, the fences repaired, and the ranch accounts showed they'd actually turn a profit this year. Small victories, but Caleb celebrated them like they were monumental achievements. "We might actually make it," he said one evening, reviewing the ledger at the kitchen table. Evelyn looked up from the shirt she was mending. You sound surprised. I am. After last year, after the drought nearly killed us, I wasn't sure we'd recover. But we did. He glanced at her. Because of you. I didn't do anything special. You did everything special. You made this place functional again. You helped save the herd during the storm. He stopped, shaking his head. You made me believe we could actually build something here instead of just surviving day to day. She set down her sewing and moved to sit on his lap, wrapping her arms around his neck. We built it together. Yeah. He pulled her close. We did. But their peace was shattered 2 days later when a rider came up the road at mid-morning. Evelyn was hanging laundry when she saw him, a well-dressed man on a fine horse, clearly not from around here. Her stomach dropped. Harold Grimshaw. She recognized him immediately, even though months had passed. He was older than her by at least 20 years, with thinning hair and a soft middle that spoke of comfortable living. The smile he gave her when he dismounted was the same oily expression she remembered from San Antonio. Evelyn, my dear, he said, as if they were old friends, you've led me on quite a chase. Caleb appeared from the barn, alerted by the unfamiliar horse. His eyes went to Evelyn first, assessing whether she was all right, then to Grimshaw with an expression that could have frozen hell itself. You're on private property, Caleb said flatly. State your business or leave. Grimshaw's smile didn't waver. I'm here for what's mine. That young woman there is promised to me. Her stepfather and I have an arrangement. Is that so? Caleb moved to stand beside Evelyn, his hand finding hers. Funny thing about that, she's married to me, has been for months, legally, which means any arrangement you had with her stepfather is worthless. For the first time, Grimshaw's smile faltered. Married? That can't be legal. Her stepfather is her guardian. He would have had to consent. She's 23 years old, Evelyn said, finding her voice despite the fear making her hands shake. I don't need anyone's consent, and I married Caleb of my own free will. Your stepfather paid me $300. Then you should take that up with him. I never agreed to marry you, Mr. Grimshaw. I never wanted anything to do with you. Grimshaw's face reddened. You ungrateful little— Watch yourself, Caleb interrupted, his voice deadly quiet. You're going to want to think real careful about what comes out of your mouth next. She owes me. She owes you nothing, and you need to leave now. Or what, you'll shoot me? Grimshaw laughed, but it sounded nervous. I came here prepared to be reasonable, to offer compensation for the trouble she's caused. But if you insist on being difficult— Sheriff Cooper knows you've been looking for my wife, Caleb said. He knows about your arrangement with her stepfather, and he made it real clear that kind of business isn't welcome in this territory. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to get on that horse and ride back to wherever you came from, and you're going to tell Evelyn's stepfather that if he ever comes near her again, if you ever come near her again, you'll both answer to me. Understand? You can't threaten me. That wasn't a threat. That was a promise. Caleb took a step forward, and there was something in his posture that made Grimshaw instinctively step back. My wife is under my protection. Anyone who tries to hurt her, anyone who tries to take her away, is going to have a serious problem. And I promise you, Mr. Grimshaw, you don't want that problem. Grimshaw looked between them, clearly calculating his options. Whatever he saw in Caleb's face must have convinced him, because he mounted his horse with jerky movements. This isn't over, he said, trying to salvage some dignity. Yes, Evelyn said clearly. It is. I'm never going back to San Antonio. I'm never going to be what you and my stepfather tried to make me. I have a life here, a real life, and you have no part in it. Grimshaw's face twisted with anger, but he kicked his horse into motion and rode off without another word. They watched until he disappeared over the rise, and only then did Evelyn realize she was shaking. Hey! Caleb turned her to face him. You're safe. He's gone. What if he comes back? What if he brings my stepfather and they— it? Then we'll deal with it. But I don't think he will. Men like that, they're cowards at heart. They only go after people who can't fight back. You've got me now. You've got this ranch, this community. He knows he can't win. Evelyn buried her face in his chest, breathing in the familiar smell of him, leather and soap and sun-warmed skin. I was so scared. I know, I was too. She pulled back to look at him. You were? terrified. Not of him, but of the idea that someone might actually try to take you away. His jaw tightened. I meant what I said. Anyone who tries to hurt you will have to go through me first. My fierce protector. Always. Pete came jogging over from where he'd been watching from the barn. Everything all right, boss? Fine. Just had an unwelcome visitor. Want me to keep watch? Make sure he doesn't circle back? Wouldn't hurt, but I don't think he'll be back. Caleb kept his arm around Evelyn. Let the other hands know to keep their eyes open, though, just in case. After Pete left, Evelyn and Caleb stood in the yard for a long moment, just holding each other. The laundry flapped in the breeze behind them, and somewhere a crow called. Normal sounds. Normal life. But everything felt different now. I need to tell you something, Evelyn said quietly. What? I'm late. It took Caleb a moment to understand what she meant. When he did, his eyes went wide. Late? You mean, I think I might be pregnant. I'm not sure yet, but... She placed a hand on her stomach. I've been feeling different, and it's been over 2 weeks since I should have... Caleb's face went through about 6 different expressions in rapid succession. Shock, fear, wonder, joy. A baby? Maybe. It's too early to know for certain. But maybe. Yeah, maybe. He kissed her then, soft and reverent, like she was something precious that might break. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. I didn't think... His voice cracked. I never let myself hope for something like this. Are you happy about it? Happy doesn't even begin to cover it. He pressed his hand over hers on her stomach. Terrified, yeah, but happy. So damn happy. The possibility of a child changed something between them. Not in any dramatic way, but in small shifts. Caleb became even more protective, insisting she not lift heavy things or work too hard. Evelyn found herself thinking about the future in concrete terms. A baby, a family, a life stretching out before them full of possibility. 3 weeks later, Sarah confirmed what they'd both suspected. She took one look at Evelyn and smiled knowingly. When are you due? How did you... I've had 2 babies, Evelyn. I recognize the signs. You're glowing. I feel mostly nauseous, so that'll pass. Usually around 4 months. Sarah hugged her tight. I'm so happy for you, for both of you. When Evelyn told Caleb that evening, even though he already knew, his reaction was no less emotional. He held her and cried and laughed and couldn't seem to stop touching her stomach, even though there was nothing to feel yet. We need to fix up the spare room, he said, already planning. Make it into a nursery, and we should probably add on to the house. We'll need more space eventually, and the porch steps definitely need to be sturdier if we're going to have a child running around. And, Caleb, she placed her hands on his face. We have time. The baby won't be here until late spring. I know, but I want everything perfect. Nothing's ever perfect, but it'll be ours, and that's better. He kissed her forehead. How are you so calm about this? I'm not calm. I'm terrified, but I'm also excited. We'll figure it out as we go. What if I'm a terrible father? What if I don't know how to... Then you'll learn. Same way you learned everything else. You didn't know how to let someone love you, but you figured that out. That's different. It's not, though. You're good at things once you stop being afraid of them. Over the following months, the ranch transformed again. Caleb spent every spare moment working on the house, adding a small bedroom that faced east so the morning light would wake the baby gently, fixing every loose board and wobbly step, building a cradle from smooth oak that he sanded until it was soft as silk. Winter came, bringing cold winds and occasional snow that turned the landscape white and pristine. Evelyn's body changed, her belly growing round, and Caleb watched with a mixture of awe and protectiveness that made her love him even more. They spent long evenings by the fire, Caleb reading aloud from books Pete had brought from town, while Evelyn knitted tiny clothes. They argued good-naturedly about names, they made plans and dreamed dreams, and slowly built a life that neither of them had quite believed possible 6 months ago. On Christmas morning, Caleb gave her a gift, a small wooden bird carved with exquisite detail. A sparrow, just like the one her mother had loved. How did you know? She whispered, turning it over in her hands. You mentioned it once, months ago. Said your mother collected them. He looked almost shy. I've been working on it since before the wedding. Wanted to give you something that connected you to her since she can't be here to meet her grandchild." Evelyn couldn't speak through the tears. She just held the bird and cried while Caleb held her, and somehow that was the best Christmas gift either of them had ever received. January brought an unexpected visitor. Sheriff Cooper rode up on a gray afternoon with news that made Evelyn's heart stop. "Your stepfather's dead," Cooper said without preamble. "Died 3 weeks ago in San Antonio. Heart gave out, apparently. Thought you'd want to know." Evelyn sat down heavily on the porch steps. "He's really gone?" "Yes, ma'am. His lawyer contacted me trying to locate you. Seems you're his only living relative. There's a small inheritance, nothing much, but it's yours if you want it." She looked at Caleb, who was watching her carefully. "I don't want his money." "You sure about that?" Cooper asked. "Could be useful with a baby on the way." "I'm sure. Give it to charity, or use it for the town. I don't care. I don't want anything from him." After Cooper left, Caleb sat beside her on the steps. "You all right?" "I don't know what I am. I should feel something, shouldn't I? Relief or sadness or anger, but I just feel empty." "He wasn't a father to you, not really. You don't owe him grief." "No, I guess I don't." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Is it terrible that I'm just glad he can't hurt me anymore?" "It's honest, and honest is never terrible." "I'm free," she realized. "Really, truly free. No stepfather trying to control me, no Harold Grimshaw. Just us and this life we built." "Just us," Caleb agreed, "and that's more than enough." February came with a late cold snap that froze the creek solid. Evelyn was 7 months along now, moving slower, her back aching constantly. Caleb fussed over her like a mother hen, which she found both annoying and endearing. "I can still work," she insisted when he tried to stop her from feeding the chickens. "I know you can, but you don't have to. If I sit around all day, I'll go crazy. Then sit around and do something that doesn't require being out in the cold. You're being ridiculous." "I'm being careful. There's a difference." They bickered like that often now, but there was no heat in it. Just two people who loved each other trying to navigate new territory. And at night, when Caleb pressed his ear to her belly and talked to their unborn child, telling stories about the ranch and making promises about the future, Evelyn knew they were going to be all right. March brought warmer weather and the first signs of spring. The meadow beyond the house bloomed with wildflowers, and the cattle that had survived another winter grew fat on fresh grass. The ranch had turned a real profit for the first time in years, enough that Caleb was able to pay off the last of his debts and start putting money aside. "We're actually going to make it," he said one evening, reviewing the accounts. "You sound surprised." "I am. 5 years ago, I was convinced this place would break me, that I'd lose everything just like I almost did before. But we pulled through." "You pulled through," Evelyn corrected. "I just helped." "You did more than help. You saved this ranch, saved me." He closed the ledger and pulled her into his lap, carefully, mindful of her belly. "I was so determined to do everything alone. Thought asking for help was weakness. But turns out the strongest thing I ever did was let you in. I'm glad you did." "Me too." He kissed her gently, "Even when it scared me half to death." The baby came on a warm night in early April. Evelyn woke to cramping pains and knew immediately what was happening. She shook Caleb awake, and he went from asleep to fully alert in seconds. "Is it time?" "I think so." He was out of bed and pulling on clothes before she could say anything else. "I'll get Sarah and the doctor from town, and Caleb." She grabbed his hand. "Breathe. We have time." "How much time?" "I don't know. Hours, probably. First babies take a while." "Hours." He looked like he might be sick. "Okay, hours. I can do hours." He couldn't do hours. He paced the kitchen while Sarah and the doctor attended to Evelyn in their bedroom. He wore a path in the floor and nearly broke the handle off the coffee pot from gripping it so hard. Pete and Tom showed up at some point, alerted by the commotion, and had to physically restrain Caleb from barging into the bedroom when Evelyn cried out in pain. "She needs me," Caleb said desperately. "She needs the doctor," Tom said firmly. "And Sarah. You being in there won't help. But trust Sarah. She's done this before." It was the longest night of Caleb's life. Every sound from the bedroom made his heart stop. Every hour that passed felt like an eternity. Pete made him eat something around midnight, but he could barely swallow. Tom kept him company, telling stories about his own children's births, but Caleb barely heard them. And then, just as dawn was breaking, he heard it. A thin, reedy cry that was the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. Sarah opened the door, smiling despite looking exhausted. "You can come in now." Caleb nearly knocked her over getting through the door. Evelyn was in their bed, sweaty and pale and more beautiful than he'd ever seen her. And in her arms, wrapped in a blanket, was a tiny red-faced baby. "It's a boy," Evelyn said softly. "We have a son." Caleb couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, could only stare at the small life they'd created. "Want to hold him?" Evelyn asked. "I don't know how." "You'll figure it out." She placed the baby in his arms, and Caleb looked down at his son for the first time. The baby had stopped crying and was looking up at him with dark, unfocused eyes. One tiny hand escaped the blanket and waved in the air. "Hi," Caleb whispered, his voice breaking. "Hi there, little man. I'm your dad." The baby made a small sound, and Caleb felt something in his chest crack wide open. All the fear and doubt and walls he'd built up over the years just dissolved, gone in the face of this tiny, perfect person who depended on him completely. "He's so small," Caleb said, awed. "All babies are small," Evelyn said with a tired laugh. "But he's perfect." "He is." Caleb sat carefully on the edge of the bed, still holding his son, and looked at his wife. "Thank you for this, for him, for everything. We made him together. I know, but you did the hard part. Worth it, though." She reached out to touch the baby's cheek. "What should we name him?" They'd discussed names for months, but never decided on one. Now, looking at his son in the morning light filtering through the window Caleb had rebuilt specifically to catch the sunrise, the answer seemed obvious. "Samuel," he said, "after my grandfather, the only person in my family who ever showed me kindness." "Samuel Ryder." Evelyn tried it out. "I like it." "Samuel Mercer Ryder," Caleb amended, "after both our families. So he knows where he comes from." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "Perfect." They sat like that as the sun rose higher, Sarah quietly cleaning up and then slipping out to give them privacy. Outside, they could hear Pete and Tom celebrating, probably opening the bottle of whiskey Pete had brought just in case. But inside the small bedroom at Iron Ridge Ranch, there were just 3 people, a husband, a wife, and their son, beginning the next chapter of a life none of them could have predicted. The weeks after Samuel's birth were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. The baby didn't sleep much, which meant neither did they. Evelyn recovered slowly, and Caleb took over most of the household work along with his ranch duties. He was dead on his feet most days, but he never complained. Sarah came by often to help and to teach them things about babies they hadn't known. Tom brought gifts, a rattle he'd carved, a soft blanket his wife had made. Even Pete proved surprisingly good with the infant, able to calm him when he was fussy in a way that baffled both parents. "You're a natural," Evelyn told Pete one afternoon, watching him walk Samuel around the kitchen. "Had 3 younger siblings," Pete said with a shrug. "Raised most of them myself after Ma died. Babies ain't so different from cattle. They just need food, sleep, and someone to keep them safe." "Did you just compare my son to a cow?" Caleb asked, amused. "Point stands, boss." Life settled into a new rhythm. Exhausting, yes, but full of small joys. Samuel's first smile. The way he gripped Caleb's finger with surprising strength. The sound of his laugh when Evelyn sang to him. Every milestone felt monumental. One evening in early May, when Samuel was finally asleep in the cradle Caleb had built, they sat on the porch together for the first time in weeks. The bench Caleb had carved sat under the oak tree, and they'd taken to sitting there when they could, watching the ranch spread out before them. "You know what I realized today?" Evelyn said, her head resting on Caleb's shoulder. "What?" "It's been almost a year since I arrived here. A year since I stepped off that train not knowing what the hell I was getting into." "Best year of my life," Caleb said simply. "Even with the drought and the storm and me reorganizing your supply room without asking, especially because of those things. Because all of it led to this, to us, to him." He nodded toward the house where Samuel slept. "I spent so many years convinced I'd die alone on this ranch, that I'd work myself to death and no one would even notice I was gone. And now I have a family, a real family. You always had Pete and the ranch hands. That's not the same. They work for me. You and Samuel. His voice caught. You're mine, and I'm yours. That's different. Evelyn turned to kiss him. I love you. I love you too, more than I ever thought I could love anyone. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars appear one by one. From inside the house, they heard Samuel start to fuss, and Evelyn sighed. I'll get him, Caleb said, standing. You sure? You've been up since before dawn. So have you. Besides, I like the middle of the night feedings. It's quiet, just me and him. He went inside and Evelyn stayed on the bench, listening to him talk softly to their son. The words were too quiet to make out, but the tone was pure love. She thought about the man who'd picked her up at the train station almost a year ago, silent, closed off, emotionally distant. And she thought about the man he was now, still quiet sometimes, still reserved with strangers, but open with her in ways he'd never been with anyone. People could change, she realized. Not completely, not magically. Caleb would always be a bit reserved, would always struggle with showing emotion easily. But he'd learned to trust again, to love again, to let someone see him fully, flaws and fears and all. And she'd changed too. The desperate girl who'd run from San Antonio was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her own strength, who'd learned that survival wasn't the same as living, that home wasn't a place you were born into, but something you built with your own hands alongside people you chose to love. Caleb came back out with Samuel in his arms, the baby now calm and content. He sat beside her, and they looked at their son together. This small person who was part of both of them, who would grow up on this ranch with the endless Texas sky overhead and two parents who loved him fiercely. What are you thinking about? Caleb asked. About how strange life is, how 6 months can change everything. A year ago you were in San Antonio, trapped and miserable. And now I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Samuel yawned hugely, and they both laughed. Caleb shifted the baby so Evelyn could see his face better. You think he'll like it here? Caleb asked. Growing up on a ranch? I think he'll love it. Wide open spaces, animals, freedom. What's not to like? Hard work, long hours, isolation. Also community, purpose, family. She touched Samuel's soft hair. He'll have everything we didn't have growing up. Stability, parents who love each other, and him. That's more valuable than any city could offer. You don't ever regret leaving San Antonio, giving up city life? Not once. Do you ever regret placing that ad? Best decision I ever made. He kissed her temple. Well, second best. First was not running you off when you showed up. I was pretty persistent. You were annoying. Hey, annoyingly perfect, he amended with a smile. They sat on that bench as night deepened around them, three people who'd found each other against impossible odds. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more of the endless responsibilities that came with ranch life and parenthood. But tonight, they had this moment, perfect in its imperfection, real in ways nothing else had ever been. The bench Caleb had carved would sit under that oak tree for decades to come, weathering storms and seasons, bearing silent witness to thousands of sunrises. It would be where Caleb taught Samuel to whittle wood, where Evelyn would rock her daughter to sleep a few years later, where grandchildren would eventually play. It would become part of the ranch's story, a physical reminder of when two broken people chose to trust each other and built something lasting from the wreckage of their pasts. But they didn't know any of that yet. All they knew was that they'd survived the hardest parts, the fear, the doubt, the loneliness, and come out the other side together. The rest would come as it came, and they'd face it the way they'd faced everything else, side by side, partner to partner, heart to heart, the way it was always meant to be.